speaker is Purna Sen. Some of you will know Purna is the Labour parliamentary candidate for the constituency we're in at the moment, which is Brighton Pavilion. What you might not know is she formerly worked at Amnesty, and she's also a former head of human rights for the Commonwealth Secretariat. She's a very active campaigner in the field of human rights, and she's got a wealth and depth of knowledge in this area, which is why we asked her to come and speak today. So I'm not going to go on because she knows far more than me about this. I'll give you Purna Sen.
I am here. If I sit, is that okay? Yeah. Thank you, Claire, for that introduction. And I think I should begin with great respect, as I said to Harry. It's hard to follow somebody with that sort of story to tell. I'd like to set the context for what I'm going to say in my comments by just saying a little bit about me, because I think it's often important to be clear about who you are and where you're speaking from. So I speak to you today about War Peace and Internationalism. No small task to tie those three together, Claire, thank you. By saying why these things matter to me, really. So born in India to parents who lived through colonialism and the partition of India, I come sort of as an embodiment in some ways of what internationalism means. Born in one country, growing up in another, going back and forth between the two, children who are mixed race, and being constantly immersed in what internationalism means on a day-to-day basis. Also because of my parents' experience, I think, in India, of fighting the British and of winning independence for the jewel in the crown. Their commitment against war and to peace was very, very strong. So I grew up immersed in an anti-war household, a pro-peace household, being first taken on C&D marches in the early 60s and being at Grosvenor Square at the age of I don't quite know what, about 4, 5, and being immersed in all of that ever since. I have chosen thereafter to be involved professionally and in my career, if you can call it that, in a whole host of international aspects of the variety of work, whether it's education, whether it's gender issues, human rights, or whether it's directly negotiating with some of the key players and some of the most intractable conflicts that we've faced. I've headed a team at Amnesty International, which Claire kindly mentioned, which was negotiating with the Taliban in Afghanistan. I held Amnesty's most senior meeting with the Maoist command in Nepal. I met and negotiated with the political head of the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. I've been to Rwanda to assess the situation of that country post-genocide before it was given admittance to the Commonwealth. And I've spent, I don't know how many years, working on issues of human rights, and I want to return to that at the end of my comments because I feel that that is, Jeremy alluded to it quite a lot, that is the framework for which I think we should take a lot of regard and a lot of hope as we can find a framework from which to move forward around issues of war, conflict, peace and internationalism. So what I just want to do, and Claire, you will keep me to time. Right. What I want to do is say a little bit about war and internationalism first, and then peace and internationalism, and then base all of that around some values that I think are absolutely pertinent to those of us on the left of politics. And so for me, a fundamental aspect of left politics is our international solidarity, and that's based on the values of our common humanity and our common future, from which all of us prosper together, not at the cost of each other. Harry used a really interesting phrase just now. He said, we hoped we had fought for the society we deserved. And it's a sad reflection on where we are now in our history, that so many lives have been spent in that struggle and we're still fighting it. So I see us in that history that brings us all together around that common agenda, and I want to say a little bit about that. So, of course, war is dirty and inhumane and bloody and messy, but I think we have always to remember that every life has a value and that we can't value some over others. And I say this with a massive respect for all of us who work around Gaza. I've worked in the Middle East myself. I've worked with Palestinian refugees. I've been in Palestinian refugee camps. And I've also faced the wrath and ire of Iraqis with whom I've worked in the Middle East as the war was going on, which I opposed. and with Iraqi refugees here in the project that Jeremy was talking about earlier. So I have quite a long investment in the Middle East. But I worry that we pick some conflicts and some wars and give them a lot of attention, as we should, but forget others. And we can use different criteria to think about which war or conflict we want to focus on and when. But if we look at lives lost, there are so many to choose from. Gaza, we think 180 were dead in just a couple of days earlier this summer. Shocking figures. In Syria, we say 160,000 lives have been lost in 2 years. I remember meeting some of the young activists in Syria and outside Syria, because they were unsafe there at the time, in summer 2011, when what they were calling then the revolution was still very young, and when a lot of very young activists were incredibly excited and hopeful about change in their country. And here we are 3 years later, and things are so much worse for them. And I often wonder if those wonderful young people I met are actually even alive anymore. In Iraq, 40,000 Yazidis were displaced. 6,000, they say, have been killed by IS just in this year alone. In Ukraine, we haven't talked about Ukraine very much. In 6 months of fighting, it's reported that 2,600 people have been killed. Libya, it's a terrible mess in Libya. Sri Lanka, injustice remains. Nobody really has been held accountable for the dozens of thousands of lives that have been lost. And especially so at the end of that terrible, terrible civil war. I think we talk a little too lazily about what the options are and what needs to be done in the Middle East. And I think we need a much stronger, clearer understanding of what it feels to be in the Middle East at this time, and what the venom against the West feels like, and what it nurtures in people locally. I think we need to be much more careful, and I was very glad that Syria has been mentioned, because that was a very important step here. We need to be much more careful about jumping into interventions and what they leave behind and the mess they leave. So war itself is messy, but building peace is also messy, and it requires some of the things that I've had to do that I find very difficult. Talking to the enemy as such, talking to the Taliban, I can't recommend it. Pretty horrible thing to have to do, and to the LTTE, and arguing with them about recruitment of child soldiers and so on. But that still needs to be done. What worries me is that a lot of our conversations here are couched in a conversation about an othering that takes place. People on this side of the conversation who are consider themselves superior, knowing the right things to do, and bringing salvation to the rest of the world. It's still a colonial conversation, and it builds on, I don't know if people are familiar with Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, theories that we can never get on together, that never the twain shall find common cause or common paths to the future. And that whole process of treating people as inherently bad and different to us is a very dangerous one that's repeated and promoted through the media every single day and through too many of our politicians. I think we have to be constantly watchful as people on the left of politics to say, we know our agenda is of a common humanity and a common future, and I'm running out of time, so let me just move quickly on to what I'm calling peace. Yesterday, we had a successful vote in Parliament towards moving towards enshrining in law a 0.7% commitment to foreign aid. In peace, we sometimes forget that we're also talking about conflict and war and the ending of that. Sustainable peace is not easy to win, and it requires a sufficient investment in rehabilitation, disarmament, and development. And the word that Jeremy mentioned earlier, and justice. We don't talk enough about what justice looks like and what it means. We have to do that. We have to have public scrutiny of our involvement in international development, and we have to protect it in the name of our, and I'm calling this a bond with strangers and with people we've never met. And that is at the heart for me of what our politics is about. Not only about people facing austerity and cuts here, but the poor who we don't know and may never meet. Those are things we have to protect. And the irony is that 0.7% that was at least protected yesterday compares to the 2% that Jeremy talked about in terms of arms spending through NATO. Those contrasts are absolutely shocking and stunning and have to be addressed. Wars bring into, I think, sharp focus our relationship with others at time of upheaval, but peace has to require a follow-through on those. We had a decent vote yesterday, but I think the whole agenda of internationalism and common purpose, which is also tied up, I'm just going to bring one other theme in as if those three weren't enough, of our environmental sustainability that is damaged so deeply by lots of what happens in the name of development around mining and unsustainable development, as well as war that uproots people's lives. Yesterday I did a recording for the BBC where they talked about the Calais camp. And of course the conversation was all about security and protecting the boundaries of this country and the borders, when actually you look at the desperation of the people who couldn't make a decent life in the country where they'd much rather be, and that humanity is lost. Our task, I think our agenda has to be to keep that, and I think that the human rights framework, which we now all subscribe to, it seems, after the end of the Cold War, when it's very difficult to find unanimity around the human rights framework because of the split around economic rights and civil and political rights, we're much more all tied into this. The possibilities of that framework is absolutely huge. It's centered around a vision of a society which is good, a human existence which is based on dignity and respect for each other. And the interesting thing about a rights framework is it invests in the state an obligation to deliver peace, justice, and health, education, as well as the political rights we all know about, to deliver to their people, to all people. We have to do much better in terms of ending wars and conflict and of building peace. And peace is obviously so much more than the ending of war. We have to be clear with whom we stand and that any actions we take are legal and are built on legal foundations. We have to, and I hope this is what a Labour government can do and we can push for after 2015, is to see the absolute incompatibility of selling arms to countries where we want to then go in and solve their problems of war and conflict. Totally unsustainable, totally indefensible. I'm very happy to talk more about that. I see I'm running out of time. Thank you, Claire.